Coach, got another Friday game coming up. Does this, now that you had a Friday game and now another Friday game, does that, I guess, put you guys in a little bit more of a rhythm with the schedule?
Perhaps, yeah, it can. I say from the standpoint what we do, you just back everything up one day, probably to maybe a little bit of the framework of a practice week, and so I'd say in certain ways that's yes, sir.
DJ's spirits while he's kind of, practicing and watching. How's he looking at things right now while he's dealing with his ankle injury?
I'm good. I'd take more than anything else is just the observation that it provides, and yet still being dialed in if you're in a meeting room, or the things that you also, I think it gives maybe a guy a little bit of time to reflect that otherwise you probably don't until you get to the off season.
When you watch Isaiah right now and Arion both, what do you want to see from them as a quarterback, maybe going forward if DJ can't go for the next few games?
Just to be a solid, quality contributor as a part, because that's what you are. You're a part of a team, and for that specific side of the ball for an offense.
Garrett dealing with the broken arm, but back-to-back years with an injury like that, I'm sure you've seen guys with injuries before, but how's his spirits? How's he dealing with, being sidelined once again?
Yeah, it's part of football. It's, the physical nature of the sport. There are going to be times where there can be a rolled ankle or a shoulder, and you got to push forward, as you will have to in life, and he will.
His absence back in the defensive secondary, how does that change schematically or change personnel-wise what you guys are going to do back there?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's some things that you're going to do a little bit differently in terms of force. Whoever you add, the additional defensive back, especially when you're playing two-back teams or teams that are very, very good running the football. You have to. And so there'll be some changes and alterations that we make for this week that way.
When you watch a team like UNLV, they down big against Utah State, came back, kind of rallied back and forth with them. What stands out to you about what you see on tape?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be out on the field longer than about 10 seconds to realize they have high quality, just exceptionally talented football players. And it shows on both sides of the ball. I think the other part that's pretty impressive, you watch them play. They play in the Coliseum against USC, and a heck of a football game. Again, they're that gifted to stand toe-to-toe with USC, and then you look, offensively, they're one of the better rushing teams in this conference. In fact, they're number one in this conference when it comes to running the football.
Utah State moved their offense really fast. Do you see shades of that with UNLV, or they, what did Utah State had to drive with like 45 seconds once? Do you see that with UNLV?
At times, where they'll use a little quicker pace for their offense. Yes, sir. And other times where it's break, get a play, and maybe a ball's not snapped until 8-10 seconds left on the 25-40 second clock.
Are you assuming Armani Rogers will not play, or do you?
Well, we got to cover all bases. We always do. For us, I think we do that in terms of not just fronts or blitzes that we've seen on film from them this year. We'll go to other years when it comes to studying their defense, and it's no different with personnel too. Unless there's a clear, cold, a guy's out, I think you have to include that as a part of the equation.
How have they changed without him? Because he was obviously a huge part of everything.
He was, and yet at the same time, you look to really about the last 5 weeks of last year, they were still pretty darn efficient offensively. And they moved the ball exceptionally well the other night in Logan, Utah against an excellent defense. And they've done it really throughout the year. They've been extremely strong offensively, and and to which we said a little bit earlier, especially when it comes to being able to run the football.
Yeah, I mean, do you see Lexington Thomas as an NFL running back?
No question. Absolutely. And in fact, there are going to be a good number of guys that they have on their team that we'll face on Friday night that will play in the NFL. It's not, I don't think it takes a highly trained eye to go out there and watch these guys move and then watch a little bit of film and start to see some of the things capability-wise of what these guys have.
And this will be Air Force's last trip to Sam Boyd Stadium, I would assume. Any memories of that place?
Golly. I guess if you said you had to go back, what would have been the first year, 2008? Made a good little rally. We won that one. We had a freshman in there at quarterback that year. I think that was his second start and played really, really well. And our defense came up with some big, big stops in the fourth quarter. 2010, I think we had like 5 starters out. It was the last game of the year. On a Thursday, it was a short week. I think we're down 17-7. It looked like we were really, really on the ropes. We were able to make a good little surge and play pretty well in the fourth quarter. In 2012, we were up by a decent amount. I want to say like 10 or 11 points in the third quarter and hit a throw and fumbled. And they made a rally and beat us in 2012. So, there have been some really, really good football games between these two teams, and there have been some memorable ones, certainly in that stadium too.
And then it's a little bit strange for Air Force stats to not have a 100-yard rusher or receiver yet at this point in the season in a game. Does that tell you anything? In a game, in a single game?
Yeah, I think probably more than anything else is I don't know if we've always been – maybe once in a while there have been a season perhaps where, you've had a few, after, 6 games, midpoint of a season. I think probably a little bit the nature of what we do offensively, a ball can move around in different hands. I think especially when it comes to carries, where that's the case. And we've had a lot of guys play. I think you look at tailback, Nolan Erickson's been in there, Joe Sassier's been in there, Cade Rimsberg. Those guys have gotten a good number of carries. Ronald Cleveland's had, a good number. Parker Wilson began the year. Cole Fagan, Taven Bordeaux, Christian Mallard. We've played a lot of guys. It's probably, I think more than anything else, you could almost say if you played too many guys, rather than just saying, hey, this guy's going to shoot every one of these shots. And he's got to score 25 points in a game, so we have a guy that scored 25 points in a game. I don't know if we've necessarily tried to script it. Now, there are some guys that I think, when you go through and you put plays in your game plan where you say, hey, this probably fits this guy's strengths a little more maybe than another player. We do that part.
And you're talking about the quarterbacks and the roles they have to play, be it on the field or not. Can you relate to that a little bit? Because your journey here seemed a little similar to, to some of theirs. Is there something you can relate to?
No, I think the worst thing you can ever do as a coach is impart your own autobiography. As a parent, it's no different either. I mean, honestly. And it doesn't mean you don't draw from some experiences, and yet you're not your player. And I think it's a little short-sighted for a coach to ever do that. Now, it doesn't mean you don't try to provide some guidance, because we are going to do that, especially when it comes to instruction, showing them ways where they can continue to develop and improve as football players, as a quarterback, skill-wise. If there's a fundamental that needs work, we're going to make sure they have an opportunity to grow and develop and become a better football player.
And would you anticipate any of the corners, because you've had about 4 or 5 play this year, any of them maybe moving to safety now that there's a –
Perhaps. That is something that we've discussed. Yet, we've that's another spot. Now that you mention it, you look, you've seen 16 Robert Bullard, you've seen 4 Trey Bugg, you've seen 5 Dalen Sutton, you've seen 6 Zane Lewis. We've played some guys out there. You're right about that.
Would any of their skill sets transfer?
Could. It's something that has been discussed. Will that Will we see that Friday night? We'll see, as we head down the road.
And has Zane Lewis kind of emerged as maybe the top cover guy in that group?
He's made a lot of improvement. I think probably what was kind of in about late August, I think it's the first time where you really saw in his own eyes where he thought, you know what, I can play at this level. I mean, I think he's a guy that's naturally a little bit hard on himself, and just kind of see some of the confidence and kind of some of the steps and the improvement that he's made has helped. I think the other part, he is stronger. 2 years ago when he was here, had good feet, good instincts. Just really didn't quite have the power yet, and he's developed more power, if you will, which I think helps you as a football player, even as a cover corner.
You mentioned after the Navy game that you were really impressed with the offensive line play. Do you still see them trending upward and like where they're going right now?
Oh, in life, isn't it always like?
Yes. Yeah.
You think? We're going to keep chugging and plugging. They have played against some pretty good fronts, throughout this season. And we just, fundamentally, I mean, just the basics. It's not worn out. It's going to work and fundamentally correct some mistakes, and yet work and reinforce some of the things that you do pretty good. Try to make them even better, with that kind of growth and that development up there. And that's what we got to do, especially there. I mean, there's not a whole lot of I've always – you look at your offensive line, and so much of it's really both lines. They tend to be the soul of your football team. The kind of drive, the kind of culture, the work ethic, how much football means to them. They're not guys that always are saying, I got to have a visor and maybe SPF 10 or, every day when they go to practice, they're more worried about getting in a stance and blocking or playing a block if you're on the other side of the ball. And we just got to keep coaching. We got to keep grinding. We got to keep improving.
And typically, your offensive line is a little lighter than their defensive line. Do you notice maybe a chip on your guys' shoulder and that they play with a little bit of an edge, and you like seeing that?
Well, let me see what might be catchy there. Chip on a shoulder, momentum.
Gave you a lot to work with.
They're, edgy. The stuff that's got a little flair or drama to it.
For a group that typically likes to avoid the drama.
I got to tell you what may end up happening. We may start this counseling course. If out there, we might call it a narrative anonymous, and you join this counseling group, and if you're really, really hooked and addicted that, followers are really, we're going to help them here. Just know there's something to having some discipline and working and consistent and some grit, and we might do that just to help. If there's somebody in the general population, maybe we'll do that. Now, it's our guy. We got to play hard. We got to play well. We got to play really, really well this week. They are. You'll see right away. Whether you're in attendance or whether you view it. On Friday night. This is a really, really talented group. They're very good up front on both sides of the ball, and I think, again, that's evident by how well they play blocks defensively. Quite frankly, we struggled last year in the first 25 minutes of the game. And that was a veteran group that we had. And so I think this week, the focus and just the details, the technique and, how aggressively you got to be able to execute, certainly has our guys. It does have we got to be captivated, and we are.
On the other side, the other line, you mentioned before that it's imperative to get pressure on the quarterback. This may be a case of a week where they need to stay home a little bit and play for the run versus maybe.
You said pressure on the court. We said that today?
No, that was actually it was 2 weeks ago after the Navy game.
Okay.
Two weeks ago.
You're right. If you're asking, is each week different? It is. I mean, you have different keys. There are things that you do in regards to a game plan. There's situational football that comes into play. Okay, what do we have out of this formation? Some tips and keys, and because of it, are your intentions different in terms of get heavy on an outside pad and squeezing like crazy to play a run, or is it to get up the field hard for 2 or 3 steps and then respond back to a run? So each game is different that way, and each call is different too, based upon what you do defensively.
Finally, Jeremy Fagellum back there playing. Is he a free safety, or is he maybe like a sort of a rover in that position? Because he sure is involved in a lot of run tackles.
He is, Grant. It's and you guys a little bit earlier were asking. He has good versatility. Whether it's getting near the line of scrimmage, being able to communicate with linebackers, and yet at the same time made a heck of a play the other night in the end zone. When you start talking about having some range at that position too, and having ball skills also. I'll tell you, it's each guy that you have. You remember a couple of stories that was involved just in the evaluation process of a guy during recruiting. And I'm telling you what, and Ron Vanderliden was so adamant about taking him in recruiting. And, it just over and over. Coach, this guy is a football player, the instincts that he has, the quickness. And sure, everybody gets, you look at bodies or frames, yet we'll see how we do here, second half of the season. And, last year he played entirely at corner, and he moved, like on August 14th or 15th to safety. So it's not like he's been there 2 months, total. But he was a skilled in high school. We looked at him on both sides of the ball just because he did have some slot skills too, just in terms of hand-eye coordination. And so it's kind of when you think back and being able to project. And I big time, Vandy, to his credit, was he just, Coach, I think this guy's, he's what, is an Air Force football player and the whole bit. And I think he's probably hit on a few others just in his first couple of years of doing it. So, yeah.